So we are on the 10th and final chapter of Mary Poppins Comes Back. It is called Merry-Go-Round. Robertson A., of all people, has told the children and Mary Poppins that there's a merry-go-round in the park. And they've seen several adults leaving it who are surprised that Mary Poppins is going to let the children ride the merry-go-round. She's promised only one ride. Now the adults are all saying goodbye to Mary Poppins, which the children find very strange. They've just visited the matchman and were able to pull fruit out of one of his chalk drawings, and he said goodbye to Mary Poppins as well, so Michael asks her if she'll see him again. "Maybe and maybe not," she said shortly, "and it's no affair of yours." Jane turned and looked back. The matchman was standing by his box of chalks, gazing with all his eyes after Mary Poppins. "This is a curious day," she said, frowning. Mary Poppins glared at her. "What's wrong with it, pray?" "Well, everyone's saying goodbye and looking at you so strangely." "Speech costs nothing," snapped Mary Poppins. "And a cat can look at a king, I suppose?" Jane was silent. She knew it was no good saying anything to Mary Poppins because Mary Poppins never explained. She sighed, and because she was not quite sure why she sighed, she began to run, shrieking past Michael and Mary Poppins and the perambulator toward the thunderous music. "Wait for me! Wait for me!" screamed Michael, dashing after her, and behind him came the rumbling trundle of the perambulator as Mary Poppins hurried after them both. There stood the merry-go-round on a clear patch of lawn between the lime trees. It was a new one, very bright and shiny, with prancing horses going up and down on their brass poles. A striped flag fluttered from the top, and everywhere it was gorgeously decorated with golden scrolls and silver leaves and colored birds and stars. It was, in fact, everything Miss Lark had said, and more. The merry-go-round slowed up and drew to a standstill as they arrived. The park keeper ran up officially and held on to one of the brass poles. Come along, 3 pence a ride," he called importantly. "I know which horse I'll have," said Michael, dashing up to one painted blue and scarlet with the name Merrylegs on its gold collar. He clambered on its back and seized the pole. "No litter allowed, and observe the bylaws," called the keeper fussily as Jane sped past him. "I'll have Twinkle," she cried, climbing upon the back of a fiery white horse with its name on a red collar. Then Mary Poppins lifted the twins from the perambulator and put Barbara in front of Michael and John behind Jane. "Penny, tuppeny, 3 penny, 4 penny, a 5 penny rides," the merry-go-round attendant as he came to collect the money. 6 penny, said Mary Poppins, handing him 4 6-penny bits. The children stared amazed. They had never before had a 6-penny ride on a merry-go-round. "No litter allowed," called the keeper, his eye on the tickets in Mary Poppins' hands. "But aren't you coming?" Michael called down to her. "Hold tight, please. Hold tight. I'll take the next turn," she replied snappily. There was a hoot from the merry-go-round's chimney. The music broke out again, and slowly the horses began to move. Hold on, please," called Mary Poppins sternly. They held on. The trees were moving past them. The brass poles slipped up and down through the horses' backs. A dazzle of light fell on them from the rays of the setting sun. "Sit tight," came Mary Poppins' voice again. They sat tight. Now the trees were moving more swiftly, spinning about them as the merry-go-round gathered speed. Michael tightened his arm about Barbara's body. Jane flung back her hand and held John firmly on they rode, turning ever more quickly with their hair blowing out behind them and the wind sharp on their faces. Round and round went Merrylegs and Twinkle with the children on their backs, and the park tipping and rocking, whirling and wheeling about them. It seemed as if they would never stop, as if there were no such thing as time, as if the world was nothing but a circle of light and a group of painted horses. The sun died in the west, and the dusk came fluttering down, but still they rode faster and faster, till at last they could not distinguish tree from sky. The whole broad earth was spinning now about them, with a deep drumming sound like a humming top. Never again would Jane and Michael and John and Barbara be so close to the center of the world as they were on that whirling ride, and somehow it seemed they knew it. "For never again, was the thought in their hearts as the earth whirled about them, and they rode through the dropping dusk. Presently the trees ceased to be a circular green blur, and their trunks again became visible. The sky moved away from the earth, and the park stopped spinning. Slower and slower went the horses, and at last the merry-go-round stood still. Come along, 3 pence a ride," the park keeper was calling in the distance. Stiff from their long ride, the 4 children clambered down, but their eyes were shining, and their voices trembled with excitement. "Oh, lovely, lovely, lovely!" cried Jane, gazing at Mary Poppins with sparkling eyes, as she put John into the perambulator. "If only we could have gone on forever!" exclaimed Michael, lifting Barbara in beside him. Mary Poppins gazed down at them. Her eyes were strangely soft and gentle in the gathering dusk. "All good things come to an end," she said, for the second time that day. Then she flung up her head and glanced at the merry-go-round. "My turn!" she cried joyfully, as she stooped and took something from the perambulator. Then she straightened and stood looking at them for a moment, that strange look that seemed to plunge right down inside them and see what they were thinking. "Michael," she said lightly, touching his cheek with her hand, "be good." He stared up at her uneasily. Why had she done that? What could be the matter? "Jane, take care of Michael and the twins," said Mary Poppins, and she lifted Jane's hand and put it gently on the handle of the perambulator. All aboard!" cried the ticket collector. The lights of the merry-go-round blazed up. Mary Poppins turned. "Coming!" she called, waving her parrot-headed umbrella. She darted across the little gulf of darkness that lay between the children and the merry-go-round. "Mary Poppins!" cried Jane, with a tremble in her voice, for suddenly, she did not know why, she felt afraid. "Mary Poppins!" shouted Michael, catching Jane's fear. But Mary Poppins took no notice. She leapt gracefully upon the platform, and climbing upon the back of a dappled horse called Caramel, she sat down neatly and primly. "Single or return?" said the ticket collector. For a moment she appeared to consider the question. She glanced across at the children and back at the collector. "You never know," she said thoughtfully. "It might come in useful. I'll take a return." The ticket collector snapped a hole in the green ticket and handed it to Mary Poppins. Jane and Michael noticed that she did not pay for it. The music broke out again, softly at first, then loudly, wildly, triumphantly. Slowly the painted horses began to move. Mary Poppins looked straight ahead of her, was borne past the children. The parrot's head of her umbrella nestled under her arm. Her neatly gloved hands were closed on the brass pole, and in front of her on the horse's neck. "Michael!" cried Jane, clutching his arm. "Do you see? She must have hidden it under the rug. Her carpet-bag." Michael stared. "Do you think—" he began to whisper. Jane nodded. "But she's wearing the locket. The chain hasn't broken. I distinctly saw it." Behind them, the twins began to whimper, but Jane and Michael took no notice. They were gazing anxiously at the shining circle of horses. The merry-go-round was moving swiftly now, and soon the children could no longer tell which horse was which, nor distinguish Merrylegs from Twinkle. Everything before them was a blaze of spinning light, except for the dark figure, neat and steady, that ever and again approached them and sped past them and disappeared. Wilder and wilder grew the drumming music. Faster and faster whirled the merry-go-round. Again the dark shape rode toward them upon the dappled horse, and this time, as she came by, something bright and gleaming broke from her neck and came flying through the air to their feet. Jane bent and picked it up. It was the gold locket, hanging loosely from its broken golden chain. "It's true, then! It's true!" came Michael's bursting cry. "Oh, open it, Jane!" With trembling fingers she pressed the catch, and the locket flew open. The flickering light fell across the glass, and they saw before them their own pictured faces, clustered about a figure with straight black hair, stern blue eyes, bright pink cheeks, a nose turning upwards, like the nose of a Dutch doll. Jane, Michael, Barbara, and Annabel Banks, and Mary Poppins, read Jane from the little scroll beneath the picture. So that's what was in it," said Michael miserably, as Jane shut the locket and put it in her pocket. He knew there was no hope now. They turned again to the merry-go-round, dazzled and giddy in the spinning light, for by now the horses were flying more swiftly than ever, and the pealing music was louder than before. And then a strange thing happened. With a great blast of trumpets, the whole merry-go-round rose, spinning from the ground. Round and round, rising ever higher, the colored horses wheeled and raced, with Caramel and Mary Poppins at their head, and the swinging circle of light went lifting among the trees, turning the leaves to gold as the light fell upon them, "She's going," said Michael. "Oh, Mary Poppins, come back!" they cried, lifting their arms toward her. But her face was turned away. She looked out serenely above her horse's head and gave no sign that she had heard. "Mary Poppins!" It was a last despairing cry. No answer now came from the air. By now the merry-go-round had cleared the trees and was whirling up toward the stars. Away it went, and away, growing smaller and smaller, until the figure of Mary Poppins was but a dark speck in a wheel of light. On and on, prickling through the sky, went the merry-go-round, carrying Mary Poppins with it. And at last it was just a tiny twinkling shape, a little larger, but not otherwise different from a star. Michael sniffed and fumbled for his handkerchief. "I've got a crick in my neck," he said to explain the sniff, but when she was not looking, he hurriedly wiped his eyes. Jane, still watching the bright spinning shape, gave a little sigh. Then she turned away. "We must go home," she said flatly, remembering that Mary Poppins had told her to take care of Michael and the twins. Come along, threepence a ride." The park keeper, who had been putting litter in the baskets, returned to the scene. He glanced at the place where the merry-go-round had been, and started violently. He looked around him, and his mouth fell open. He looked up, and his eyes nearly burst out of his head. "See here!" he shouted. "This won't do. Here one minute and gone the next. It's against the regulations. I'll have the law on you." He shook his fist wildly at the empty air. "I never saw such a thing. Not even when I was a boy. I must make a report. I shall tell the Lord Mayor." Silently the children turned away. The merry-go-round had left no trace in the grass, not a dent in the clover, except for the park keeper, who stood there shouting and waving his arms. The green lawn was quite empty. "She took her turn," said Michael, walking slowly beside the perambulator. "Do you think that means she'll come back?" Jane thought for a moment. "Perhaps if we want her enough," she said slowly. "Yes, perhaps," he repeated, sighing a little, and said no more till they were back in the nursery. And there we will pause.